Let's bring in political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley, who joins us for more. A very good evening to you, Dr. McKinley. Thank you for your time. The ANC enters the government of national unity, which includes the DA, despite COSATU and the SACP having expressed their dissatisfaction. What implications could this move have on the tripartite alliance?
Well, I don't think it's going to have any immediate real impact in terms of the alliance breaking up or anything like this. I mean, let's look at the past in terms of SACP and COSATU. They've been complaining for the last 25 years about the ANC implementing anti-worker policies, about neoliberalism, about austerity, and they will continue to do so. But the bottom line is that COSATU and the SACP have so far hitched their wagon to the ANC's vehicle. And unless they make a decision, which doesn't look like it is in the offing, to contest, to break away and say, let's form a workers' party or let's form SACP to contest the elections on its own, which was a debate a few years ago, I don't see any kind of meaningful real, should we say, outcome of their criticism of the GNU. They'll criticize, and they have every right to do so, and they'll make noise, but in terms of their options, their strategic options, they're fairly limited at this stage.
What steps could we see? I mean, you refer to the resurfacing of the federation standing independently for elections. I mean, that was a discussion that was had a few years ago, but what steps would show that perhaps some action of some sort will take place?
Well, we would possibly, let's wait and see what the GNU would do. I mean, COSATU's made it clear that they're afraid that the DA is going to influence the ANC to be more anti-worker, to, for example, do away with the minimum wage, or to pull back some of the gains from the Labor Relations Act or the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, things that have helped a lot of workers in this country. If the GNU does that, then we're probably going to see COSATU go on strike. We're going to see political actions. We're going to see the SACP on the streets. This would be the natural response. I don't think it would mean that they would basically, say we're going to leave the ANC, because the options are either two things. One is that they either go on their own, which they don't seem to have the capabilities of doing right now, and the other would be to move in the direction of the EFF-MK, which clearly neither of them want to do either. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to possibly see more labor relations conflict. You're going to see a more politically active COSATU. It's been fairly quiet for the last few years, and an SACP that's got to make its mind up whether or not it wants to be relevant politically, or whether or not it wants to continue to be a junior partner to the ANC.
How should we then perhaps have some depth and understanding on the differences between the government of national unity and the coalition government?
Well, I think it's quite clear in that sense. I mean, a coalition government would have been a direct, let's say ANC-DA or ANC-MK or ANC-EFF or whatever agreement between two political parties, specifically to those parties. The GNU basically says the door is open. At the moment, there's 5 parties that have joined the GNU. There could be more. Politics is, has a way of sort of chastening a lot of organizations that feel like they're left out of that power block. So you could have a situation a year down the road where you have more political parties joining. And the GNU, if you look at this statement of intent, it's supposed to be ruled by consensus and then essentially trying to formulate policies. This is going to be very interesting because it's the first time the ANC or any of the other political parties have really tried this at a national level. So we're in uncharted waters. We don't know exactly what it's going to mean, but in legal terms, basically what it does is it binds those parties that are party to the GNU to a some degree of common policy formulation, common agreement, and to reach that by consensus. And when they cannot, to have some kind of conflict or resolution, a mediation to that. Whether or not that works out fairly smoothly, I doubt it. I think it's going to be a rough ride. because it's the first time we're doing this, but I think it's going to be a very interesting one that harks back to 30 years ago when many people thought that the GNU of the 1994 variety was going to be a complete disaster, and it ended up having its problems, but it ended up seeing us through to the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we just had a discussion a short while ago about the IFP's role in 1994 at that GNU, and how much perhaps it will be revitalized perhaps with this move and this backing from the GNU of 2024. What are your thoughts around that?
I think the IFP, the passing away of their longtime leader, obviously Buthelezi, was in many cases, I think, a wake-up call for the IFP itself, and it's lost, it lost some support in this election. But I think it's made a strategically smart move. Which is to say that in this case, we're going to bury the hatchet, at least for now. We're going to try to cooperate. And they've been handsomely rewarded in KZN for that cooperation by basically having the premiership and running quite a number of the departments. So in some ways, we had talked about this as analysts and many others a few years ago, when the ANC was becoming much more of a rural-based party as opposed to an urban-based one. And in some ways, the IFP is also a strategic partner in the context of MK's rise in KZN. So yes, I think in many cases there's a real concern, irrespective of the ideological differences which many people are talking about the rise of an ethnic politics, a rise of more divisions within our society based upon narrow identities, whether that's nationality or ethnicity or race. And in this case, I think that irrespective of what we might think of the GNU's ideological potential, to move, say, center-right, or the claims by MK and EFF that they are now a progressive alliance, which is very, very debatable. I think the real issue for most South Africans is they want to see delivery. They want to see practical things. And I think the IFP, the ANC and the DA, at least in paper, have saying that they're going to try to do these things. Yeah. It's not going to be without controversy. It's not going to be without opposition. That's what a really healthy democracy demands. So I think we should gear up, we should fasten our seatbelts, and we should engage the ride, because this is what we've delivered. This is what our elections have delivered, and people must engage this, whatever political side of the fence they are on.
So, looking at the remarks of former President Jacob Zuma last night, who cautioned that the ANC and the DA were misleading the public by referring to the coalition as a government of national unity, what should be made of such an assertion?
Well, basically, I think that ex-President Zuma was referring to the fact that they're not part of it. That EFF and MK, who represent a minority of the electorate, are not part of a government, and so therefore how can it be a government of national unity, which would assume that it's all political parties involved? Well, that's their choice. I mean, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to call it a government of national unity and they say that the door is open, well, I mean, then the door is open. If you're not going to walk through that door, if you're not going to even consider that option, well, then you can't. It's a bit difficult to then turn around and say there is no such thing as the GNU. Yeah. Whatever we want to call it, multi-party government, a GNU, whatever it is, MK is going to have to learn that they are going to have to participate in a democratic order as an opposition party. That's a role that is important. It's a role that they can play. They have every right to raise all their objections, but they need to do so within the democratic frame. And I think this is what most people are saying to MK and what the electorate said to MK. And they have a role to play, but the role is not going to be one of simply just causing trouble all the time or questioning or running to the courts every single time you don't get your way, because eventually people will lose patience with that. The question is, does MK and EFF have things to offer the electorate? Do they have a different vision, an alternative politics? Can they make people believe that they are able to push that agenda forward? And therefore, that's what the role of an opposition does. And now we've seen in this case how the opposition parties over the last several years have now come into the government and are now going to play that role. So I think in this context, what MK needs to understand very clearly is that we live in a democracy. Whether there's some in MK that do not agree with that democratic culture and that democratic practice, that's their right to do so, but I think they'll pay a very, very heavy price if they do not play within the democratic frame.
Yeah. Very well. Some sound advice there. Thank you so much for your time. Political analyst, Dr. Dale McKinley.